Welcome to the Soul Seeker podcast. I'm your host, Sam Kabert, and this year marks the 5th birthday of the Soul Seeker podcast. I started this pod back in 2019 when I was taking my first steps on the path of remembering. And at the time, the tagline for the show was a journey of self-discovery. A year later, it became a journey of remembering. Yet, what I know now is back then I was still seeking. And what I've come to know now is that it's the journey of seeking that brings us the silent, slow stillness of acceptance. And therein lies our own innate wisdom. It's my mission now to eradicate the glorification of hustle culture, as it was my drive in entrepreneurship that led to a greater whole, and that's because I was outsourcing my sovereignty rather than looking within. So let this be your invitation to take a deep breath in and remember that at any time we can shift our thoughts and our feelings to create the outer world in which we wish to live. Soul Seekers, it's time to grow. Let's go. What is up, and welcome back to another episode of the Soul Seeker podcast. I am so excited to bring you guys this brand new episode and a brand new year, at least the time of this podcast being released. Happy 2025. This is the first episode of the new year, and this is episode number 264 of the Soul Seeker podcast. We are now going on strong for 6 years. Wow. That's incredible to say. So thank you so much for being here. My guest in this episode is Ilan Goldenblatt, and he is the Retreat Director at Soltara Healing Center. Now, this episode is all about doing the work. It's all about shadow work. It's all about plant medicine work, because Soltara is an ayahuasca healing center. And in this episode, we're going to hear about how Ilan first danced with ayahuasca back in 2004 and how that has shaped his journey. He has, speaking of his journey, he has quite the background. I mean, this man was in politics in Canada. He even worked for a chief of staff for someone that he got into election. I forget exactly the position because I'm American, so some of the positions are a little bit different, but just going from being in politics to now working with one of the premier ayahuasca healing centers is absolutely incredible. If you're interested in ayahuasca, if you haven't heard of Soltara, they're out there in Costa Rica. They have a couple locations. Ilan talks about how they have some satellite locations as well. And what's really fascinating is their advisor board. I mean, they have some amazing advisors on the board, and two of them that you probably know. One is Dr. Gabor Mate, and another is Dr. Dennis McKenna. And the three other, I'm not familiar with them, but I see PhDs behind them and just so much support. I know so many people that have gone to Soltara and have had incredible experiences. I've done ayahuasca on 4 different occasions now, but I have not been to Soltara. I've been wanting to go since I first heard about it for 4 years. Just I haven't had the opportunity, haven't had the call. Things haven't lined up quite yet. So when that happens, I'm looking forward to it. But till then, I get to live vicariously through people who have, just like Ilan. So in this episode, you're going to learn and you're going to hear so much. Everything we're talking about here is about reality. What is reality? What is it not? What do we think we know? Maybe we know nothing. And maybe when we think we know everything is exactly when we know nothing. And I know you guys are going to get a kick out of this episode because I really got so much out of it. So I know you will too. If you're new to the Soul Seeker podcast, please, if you get anything out of this at all, just take a moment and leave the pod a 5-star review. It helps so other people can benefit from the podcast because it's an algorithm thing. By leaving a review, it shows up in the algorithm more and more people can discover it and benefit from what you're hearing right now, just like how you're benefiting. And if you want to go deeper with me, know that I am an integration guide and a keynote speaker. The easiest way to work with me is the freeway, and that is through my online community called the Breath Club. And the Breath Club is an online community where I am teaching nervous system regulation through an online course along with a daily on daily accountability with the online community and weekly calls for connection, and also where I lead a breathwork exercise. You can find the links to the show notes, or you can find the links to the Breath Club and anything else referenced in this podcast in the show notes. With that, enjoy this episode with Ilan Goldenblatt. Here we are again for another episode of the Soul Seeker podcast. And as always, we're going to kick it off with some breath. So for myself, for my guest Ilan, and for those of you listening, you can all breathe with us. Maybe you're not in an area or space that you can close your eyes, but you can always breathe with us. So Ilan, for you, for me, and for anyone that would like to close their eyes, just feeling comfortable to close down your eyes, maybe taking a seat, allowing yourself to feel your feet on the floor, sitting up straight, and through the nose, inhaling all the way up, sipping in a bit more air at the top. Hold the breath. Audible sigh, let it go. Big inhale all the way up as you let the belly expand, bringing that breath all the way up and sipping in a bit more air at the top. Rolling up the eyes. Just allowing yourself to feel. And exhale, let it go. And last one, big inhale up. Sipping in a bit more at the top. Rolling up the eyes. And audible exhale. Letting the breath return to its natural state and rhythm, and flickering the eyes back open. Ilan, welcome to the Soul Seeker podcast. I am so excited to be sitting here with you and talking all things ayahuasca, medicine, your journey. Who knows where this is going to go? Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Sam. It's great to be here, and thanks for starting with some grounding breaths. I love grounding with breath.
It's so important, and I think we're going to touch on that in different kinds of ways here. But let's kick it off with something that you just mentioned to me before we hit record. You said before you were working with plant medicine and ayahuasca, you had a condescending attitude towards spirituality. Could you unpack that?
Yeah, so my journey with ayahuasca started 20 years ago, actually, like in the underground scene on Vancouver Island. And before then, I was definitely a psychonaut. I was a psychedelic adventurer, but I viewed things from a very kind of analytical, frontal lobe, kind of linear perspective. And to me, it was all about like, oh, molecules engaging with receptors and hidden chambers of the brain or the mind. It wasn't about like spirituality, and even like glimpses of sort of like ecstasy or stuff like that that I had in different experiences with LSD or mushrooms. They didn't feel spiritual to me. Like I was a loving person. I had a bit of like, a hippie mentality, but it wasn't about spirituality. And I grew up kind of with religion in the periphery a lot. And that made me have a very anti-religious kind of perspective as a kid and as a young adult and into my 20s. And that, as you see a lot with kind of intelligent, young, arrogant people, my attitude towards spirituality, I equated with religion. I didn't have like a separate kind of oh, you can have spirituality that wasn't part of a structure with the hierarchy and the institution. And I was just super like, yeah, that's for stupid people who can't handle living through life and are just like, ungrounded and are afraid of staring reality in the face as it is. And then ayahuasca came along, and to me, when I first came to ayahuasca, it was about like just more like what's the next psychedelic, like what can I experience that's going to be like the next thing, and what's going to be like. and it just really kind of, punched me in the face or in the gut. And I had my first kind of like spiritual experiences. And, in the early days, my mind would quickly kind of like rationalize it away. I'd forget. The doubts would kind of creep back into like, oh yeah, you were just high, and being high, you had this like you had maybe a suggestive experience that confused you. But over having gotten there again and again and again, I started opening my mind and started actually listening to the messages that I was receiving. And I was like, okay, I don't know anything, and I'm now like really open to it. And it was beginning of a beautiful journey, and I feel like my life has really been enriched by it.
So many questions, so many different ways to take that. So, towards the end there, you mentioned gaslighting yourself. You didn't use that term, but I think that is so common. Could you speak to gaslighting yourself after an experience like this, and what people can do to not gaslight themselves?
Yeah, totally. I think gaslighting is a really good way to look at it, and it's all kind of part of like the stories that we tell ourselves and how attached we become to these stories in our minds, our storytelling machines, and those stories are things that we get from other people, from media, from books, from all these podcasts, whatever we get, and we take them in, we integrate them, we become attached to them, we identify with them. And sometimes we're so like our mind is so good at it and our ego is so good at it that we forget even that somebody actually that we that there was a seed outside of us that sort of gave us this thing. It becomes kind of like our truth that we came to on our own. And for me,
Mm,
part of that was that there is nothing beyond what we can see and feel and measure, and that the world is not actually a mysterious place. Reality is not a mystery. Whatever we don't understand now, one day we will understand it. One day we will develop the microscope or the theory or the telescope or whatever is going to be like the machine that's going to measure it, and everything will be explainable. That was a really powerful idea, powerful story. So powerful, in fact, that I would say it was kind of became part of my religion. Like, and I think that there is kind of a religious belief in that. And that religious belief, as with many religious beliefs, including spiritual religious beliefs, ends up being kind of a feeling sorry and condescending towards anybody who doesn't see the truth that you are
mm,
holding in your mind, right? And so for me, and so the gaslighting there is that like you have an experience that, or I would have experiences that would unseat that would like pull apart some of the foundations of that story, and there would be a part of me that would go like, wow, there's like, so hang on, maybe this story isn't true, and so what is true? And that would bring me into a space of like of not knowing and of discomfort and of doubts and all that kind of stuff. And it would in a way, it would come up with like, oh wait, so I've been like for the last 25 years, 28 years, 30 years, I've had this like really powerful attachment to this idea, and now maybe this idea is wrong. So what does that say about me for all these years? I was just, an idiot or a fool, and as I said, I was arrogant and condescending about it. So I'd made fun of people. I'd made people feel stupid or dominated them or stuff like that by using their beliefs against them. And suddenly here I was going like, oh, wait a minute. I'm starting to believe some of these things. I'm starting to have an acceptance. And then what would happen is that as time would go by from the last spiritual experience that I've had, like that doubt would come creeping back in. The old structures would come creeping back in and go like, well, maybe that happened, but maybe it's more likely that actually I was just in a suggestive space, and in that suggestive space and altered space, these ideas came in, and I didn't have my wits about me to be able to actually see them as just like a phenomenology that's associated with molecules interacting with receptors in my brain. And
mm.
so I'm gonna set that aside and stop viewing it as a spiritual experience and just view it as like, wow, I was really high, right? And that was kind of like gaslighting myself, and then I'd go back into ceremony or into an experience, and I'd have again a mystical experience, a spiritual experience. And I remember literally saying, don't ever deny this. Like, don't ever deny this. Like, oh, I remember that I had this like 6 months ago, and I remember that I denied it again. And like, don't ever deny this. This is real. This, you cannot deny this experience. But it took a few of those times before I was like, okay, I'm letting go of that old story. I'm learning to tell a new story. And then a big part of that new story is I don't know. I don't know what's going on. Here I am, I'm 20 years into ayahuasca. I've drunk ayahuasca hundreds of times. I've facilitated hundreds of ceremonies, thousands of people. And I still, like when people ask me, like, so what do you think ayahuasca is? I'm like, I have no idea what ayahuasca is. It's a mystery. And I'm not here to actually tell you what ayahuasca is. I can tell you like how I've experienced it. I can also tell you what I've heard from other people who have experienced it, but I can't tell you for sure what it is. But for me, it has upended my understanding of reality. And part of that has been to really put a big mirror in front of me that showed me that my kind of analytical brain that sought to like explain it was just a form of control, and that that form of control actually was rooted in some kind of fear, and that if I, that that was the root of it. And so the answer, not the answer to like what is going on, but the answer to how I should engage with the mystery is not from a place of mind, but from a place of heart. And that's a continual struggle. I'm not like, it's not like, oh yeah, I've figured it out. My mind is aside, my ego isn't involved, and my heart is involved, and I'm just trusting. There is a continual kind of like trying to stay on the path, veering off the path, noticing that I veered off the path, pulling myself back onto the path. It's a continual like re kind of Ouroboros, snake and me but I love it. Like I'm really, it's something that I'm I feel a lot more. First of all, I love that there's mystery. I love that the world is actually a magical, mysterious place. I have no doubt now that that some of the most important things, or maybe the most important things of reality, we will never be able to explain. And I love that because that gives me much more hope, because I think that when my mind looks at like what's going on in the world, it's easy to become hopeless. But then when I remember that there is real mystery and that there are non-human forces, entities, intelligences, consciousnesses that for some weird, strange reason want us to succeed as individuals and as a collective, I'm kind of like, okay, there's hope. So I'm just gonna keep putting my shoulder to that, to push against that boulder from a place of like hope, and let's see what we can do together.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that all. And I resonate deeply with everything you said, especially just like not having figured it out. And it's the Ouroboros, or for me, I talk about the infinity, like the symbol of the infinity. It's got its highs and its lows, and it always comes back to me itself exactly where it's at. And I'm like, that's like the human experience, right? If
Mhm.
we can zoom out. So I'm curious, what drew you to your first ayahuasca ceremony? Because I believe you said it was back in 2004 and you were more of a psychonaut at the time, and ayahuasca wasn't nearly as readily available or known of back then as it is now. And it is such a big experience. So, what drew you to that first ceremony?
So it's funny that you asked that because, like, in my teenage years, I came across the teachings of Don Juan, the Carlos Castaneda series. And that was my first, because, I grew up in a household that was pretty conservative, like small c conservative, where, like, oh, if you do psychedelics, you're going to end up in a psych ward. That was, that was like direct line from like, do LSD or do mushrooms, end up in a hospital in a padded
You
room.
were like, sign me up. Yeah.
Yeah, at first I wasn't, and then I read like the teachings of Don Juan and started reading sort of other things, and I was like, wow, okay, I'm super curious about this. Again, at that time, it wasn't from a spiritual perspective, but it was from a perspective of like altered states of consciousness. What other knowledge is there? How can I understand myself better, know myself better, master myself better, like master my urges, master my addictions, master my ego better through these tools. And so when I started experimenting and experiencing psychedelics, which in the first years was mainly mushrooms and LSD, and then MDMA, which I don't really refer to as a psychedelic, but it certainly puts you in an altered state. And it's arguable, and don't want to have that argument. But I still had this thing of like, I would love to experience a plant medicine in a traditional setting, in a ceremonial setting that comes from an indigenous lineage that's ancient. And so I kind of like, I put that out into the universe, and I was kind of like, I'm waiting for my opportunity to come up. And I thought, okay, maybe I'll travel to Mexico and do peyote, or maybe I'll do, there were all kinds of things that I had heard about. And then one day I was at a bar listening to a band on Vancouver Island in British Columbia in Canada, and I wasn't drinking in those days. I was kind of anti-alcohol. I'm not a big drinker, but in those days I was like totally not drinking. But I was watching this band, and I ran into this friend that I hadn't seen in a long time, and she was just glowing. And I was like, "Hey, like you look amazing. What's happening in your life?" And she was like, "Oh my God, this last weekend I did ayahuasca and it was amazing." And I was like, "What? You did it? Where did you do ayahuasca?" She's like, "Here on the island." And I'm like, "Really? In what kind of setting?" She was like, "In an indigenous like set with apprentices who have studied under Peruvian indigenous maestros." And I'm like, "Hook a brother up. Like, where is this? Like, was this a one-time thing? Does this exist?" And he's like, "No, there's ceremonies in 3 weeks. And I know the person who's organizing them, and I know that there's space." And so she gave me the phone number, and I called the person and asked her their space, and she said that there was. And back in those days, like I don't know if you know what the prices are for ayahuasca ceremonies around where you are, but the prices are pretty crazy these days for North America. And I mean, I don't blame people because there's risk and all that other stuff involved. But back in those days, you could do a ceremony for 100 Canadian dollars. So that's like 60 US dollars, something like that for the night. And so I went and I did a ceremony, and it completely blew my mind and shattered everything that I'd understood about myself, about reality, about my mind, about psychedelics. And in the morning, I came to the organizer and I was like, "When can I do this again?" And they're like, "You can do it tonight. There's room tonight." And I'm like, "You can do this 2 nights in a row?" And they're like, "You can do this 20 nights in a row." And I'm like, "And it's safe?" They're like, "Yeah." "And do you build a tolerance?" They're like, "No." I'm like, "Okay, sign me up for tonight." And so I did it again. And after that, I basically, for the next 2 years, started doing it as often as I could, and very quickly started organizing the ceremonies. So I would kind of find the place, connect with the healer, and find a location, sign up enough people from my community, which was both because I became this evangelist. I was like to all my friends, like, "You guys all have to do this thing." And also just to create more access to myself, because there wasn't that much happening yet. It was kind of really nascent and early days for it. So by me kind of taking on organizing, it became this thing that I could like access, once every 2 months, do 2 or 3 ceremonies in a row.
Right.
And yeah, that's how it started.
Have you ever felt overwhelmed by emotions and unsure how to move through them? Sam created the Breath Club to help you find calm and clarity. In this free online community, Sam teaches how to regulate your nervous system through breathwork and process emotions effectively. Did you know that most emotions only last 90 seconds when you fully allow yourself to feel them? This is called the 90-second rule, and it's a powerful tool backed by science for emotional healing. Each week, Sam hosts live calls to guide breathwork practices and create real connection. You'll also get access to an online course and pre-recorded breathwork videos. The link to join is in the show notes.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that story. And what I think is so impactful for people to hear is the synchronicity of you feeling called. You put the intention out there, you waited. And I like to say feminine. Sometimes people that might be a little bit of a turnoff and they might not resonate with that, but it's more of that inner world or that yin energy where we're being guided by the universe and it came to you. And I often say, so I'm an integration guide and I get questions all the time, like, how do you know when you're ready or how do you know when you're called? And typically what I will say is if you have to be in your masculine, like roll up your sleeves and look it up, you're probably not being called. But the caveat is if you're at rock bottom, which like what I was telling you about before we hit record, and you go in that way, it's like that's when it makes sense. But for the most part, I believe that you should feel called. But you being the retreat director at Soltara, a very well known and respected ayahuasca center, I'm curious what your thoughts are in terms of how to know when you're ready and the dance between being called, like kind of discerning, like I'm waiting for the call, but I also am ready. And, I don't want to be totally just like planning it like a vacation, but yeah, what are your thoughts there?
I think that like when you start asking yourself the question, how do I know when I'm ready? It's a sign that you're getting close. Like because otherwise, usually otherwise you feel I'm not interested in that at all, or it's way more about fear and just like, not like really knowing that's not for me. Once you start asking like, oh, like I'm feeling, I'm getting a tickle, or I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure that I'm ready. How do I know that I'm ready? Um, to me, it is like for one thing, like for a lot of people at Soltara, what often happens is that people do start noticing synchronicities. People will start having dreams that are not their usual in their usual milieu, like what we refer to as medicine dreams. Ayahuasca will start popping up. I mean, it's one thing, if you talk about ayahuasca near your phone, maybe your phone is going to start popping up ayahuasca because of, the algorithm. But if you're starting to like suddenly meet a bunch of people who are into medicine work, who have done medicine work, um, notice that. Notice just how you feel when you think about that. And there's a difference between, and this difference is it's pretty subtle thing, and I'm sure that you'll know what I'm talking about, Sam. The difference between kind of an excited anxiety that's kind of a little bit like there's a curiosity there, there's a pull there, and just like a fear that's like a shutdown response, right? So if you're thinking about it and you're feeling that like fear shutdown response, then maybe it's a good moment to sort of like pause and wait a little bit. And waiting can mean just waiting, and waiting can also mean kind of working with a coach or with somebody with psychedelic integration experience to start teasing out like why you'd want to go to a retreat, what might be there for you, what might your intentions be, what are you looking for, where do you feel stuck, what have you done about that stuckness before that has worked or hasn't worked, and stuff like that. So it can mean like actually engaging and seeing like can you bring yourself through work with somebody external, or through work with external resources, be they books, courses, podcasts, stuff like that. And it can also just be waiting a little bit to see if whether there's going to be external coincidences. We like to say that asterisks, there are no coincidences in medicine work. um, and sort of waiting to see if more signs start popping up for you. But if what you're feeling, because I think it is there's an appropriate sort of a little bit of fear around going to a first big sort of medicine experience that's not microdosing mushrooms or stuff like that. So that there's an appropriate amount of like a little bit of anxiety if you're going to take 5 to 7 grams of potent mushrooms on your own in the dark. There's an appropriate amount of a little bit of fear and anxiety if you're going to go drink ayahuasca for the first time. But the question is like, is that fear a total like shutdown response, or is that fear kind of like, yeah, I'm going into the unknown, but I feel actually that with the right amount of support, and if I had, somebody there who is experienced and who I trusted, do I believe that I could overcome this, or do I believe that I could face whatever is out there to be faced? And then there's that part of like, can I connect to my heart center and connect to that trust rather than doing the mental gymnastics?
I've never thought about this before, but from from my perspective, a lot of things that I look at, I try to look at from like an inner world, outer world, feminine, masculine, yin yang, etc. perspective. And with what you're describing with the fear, what's coming up for me is that fear, it's almost like if it's more of a tangible, am I going to be safe type fear versus like the fear of letting go and what's on the other side. And that's more of like the spiritual, the psychosomatic type emotional fear. What do you think about that? Does that resonate with you all? Have you thought about that?
Well, it does, although I think that, our being, as I said, that our mind is the story-making machine, and that the ego is so good at like, jiu-jitsuing us into what works for it and what fits into the story that it's trying to tell. So it can, if the ego is feeling a fear of letting go, it can turn that into other fears. It's just
True. Yeah.
like, oh, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna have all these bad things happen to me. I'm gonna be like, fill in the blank, whatever your biggest fears are. And that could just be like, a projection or some kind of like aversion that actually your fear that there's a part of you that knows exactly what you're afraid of, that knows like, oh, I'm afraid that this trauma is going to come up. I'm afraid that even as simple as like, we get attached to our own trauma. And the way that we talk about trauma becomes part of the trauma. So how much we talk about whoever victimized us or what the bad things that happened to us becomes part of the building blocks of that trauma. And as we sort of start considering that, oh, we kind of get addicted and attached to that story. And when there's a part of us that when we start sort of thinking, I might be able to let go of that story, there's a part of us that goes like, hang on a minute, like,
Yeah.
I don't know who I am without this story. Maybe without this story, I'm nobody. Maybe without this story, I go crazy. Maybe without this story, I crumple and become somebody who can't navigate through the world, who has no agency. But where the reality is that actually that's just the attachment to the story. One of the maestros at Soltara once said that our trauma kind of like, I'll paraphrase a little bit to make this more accessible, but he said that your trauma kind of enters into your chest or into your stomach and builds kind of like a man cave in there, right? Like the 70-inch TV and the beer fridge and the big sound system and the sectional couch and all these kind of things. And when you start doing things that are trying to evict that trauma and you put the eviction notice on the door of that man cave, trauma starts going crazy and saying like, no, you don't want to evict me. And in doing that, it accesses your egoic identity structures, and it tells you like, if you evict me, you're gonna die. If you evict me, you're not gonna know who you're gonna go crazy. If you're gonna evict me, you're gonna lose all your friends. You're gonna lose your contacts. Your family's gonna turn your back on you because everybody knows you as this. And despite the fact that this is painful and that this has been difficult for you, this is the devil you know. And has it really been that painful? Come on, like you know who you are. This is something that you've learned to live with. And and we get addicted to negativity. We get addicted to negativity. We get addicted to sympathy, to empathy that we get from people. We get addicted to the power that we can get out of thinking negative thoughts, the self-righteousness that we can feel out of our victim state. So these are all it's all story. And one of the things that are amazing about plant medicine, and for me, it's ayahuasca has been the biggest, but I've since then I've reached the state also in mushrooms, is that they open this window that allows us to learn how to tell a new story. And the first way that they do that is by really putting up a mirror and going, yeah, that's an interesting story you've been telling yourself, rather than this is reality, going like, yeah, this is just a story.
And what we tell ourselves, that creates our reality. And I really like the way you described that with the trauma, putting up the TV, the couch, and just kind of gets comfortable. That's a good way to visualize it. So I appreciate you sharing that. I know you've studied with and under Gabor Mate as well, and that shows when you're speaking about all of this. I'm curious, like victim mentality, victim consciousness, that's what we're talking about here a lot of times when we kind of blame that thing. And it's not uncommon. I don't think it happens often, but it happens more often than, we would like it to happen. But someone might do a medicine ceremony, whether it's ayahuasca or bufo or mushrooms, even microdosing with mushrooms, I've seen it. And then they blame the medicine and it sends them down a negative spiral. And for a lot of people, it seems like that'll be a few days, maybe a few weeks. But for the extreme cases that I've seen, it's been months or even a year. I don't know if it can go past, I guess it could, like a psychotic break, but not going that deep. Like when someone decides to do maybe ayahuasca or another medicine, and then they have so many challenges in the integration where they start to point the finger at the medicine, it starts to create more problems in their life. And even when they are working with an integration coach or therapist or someone who is supporting them in the process, a lot of times they're just so stuck in that story. So in your experience, what have you seen in regard to that, and how can we best help those people?
Yeah, so that's where, the good facilitation and good integration support are super key. Like when I first started drinking ayahuasca, it was years before I came across a facilitator. Like, there was the healer and then there was a helper. And the helper, most of what they did was help clean up buckets that were kicked over and tell you to shut up if you were being disruptive. That was pretty much it.
Tell
Like
you
they were
shut up, really shut up.
Oh yeah. Well, it would
Wow.
be, maybe it wouldn't be like, "Hey, Lan, shut up," but it would be like, "Hey, Lan, you're being disruptive. Like you need to be quiet." And then I'd be like, "Oh my God, so sorry. I'm really, really sorry." And then 5 minutes later, like, "Ilan, you're being disruptive again." And then on the third time, maybe we're like, "Hey, Ilan, shut up. Like you're really like you're making a lot of noise here."
In
And
what regard, just for people that haven't done ayahuasca or had a ceremony like that, in what way would you say you or someone would be disruptive where it's not appropriate versus disruptive where it is appropriate?
yeah, so in an ayahuasca ceremony where people are connecting, where it's good medicine, medicine strong, and people are connecting, there is a soundtrack to that, and it's not silent. There's people purging, there's people crying, there's people laughing, there's people sighing. There might be somebody caught in, occasionally verbalizing some stuff. There might be people thrashing a little bit. Ayahuasca can be like super physical, so it might be people moving around on their mats, stuff like that. But then when it becomes kind of disruptive is when somebody starts just like talking loudly, and that happens every once in a while. It's kind of like just somebody like, "Yeah, yeah, I get it, I understand. You can stop now. Can somebody make this stop? I get it." Like in full volume or all kinds of stuff like that. And then at Soltara, we'll come over to the person and we'll say, and very softly in almost like a whisper that couldn't, right into their ears, very like sub vocalization, kind of try to bring people back to consciousness of their body, of space and time, the fact that they're in an ayahuasca ceremony, help them breathe breath as I know that your breath is a big thing for you and a big thing for what you teach. And it's a huge thing that we work with at Soltara and teach guests to work with, bringing people back to their breath, which brings them to the present, which grounds people. And so that's an example. But then, people, we call it kind of like looping. People will start, like sometimes drumming on the floor or whistling or just going through a, literally a loop of like every 2 minutes, a really, really loud yawn. That's not just the normal yawn, but it's like, ah!
That's that like lion type feeling where it's waking up. Oh my God, that brings me back to ceremonies where I don't know if I was being disruptive with my yawn, but it was a massive, it just felt like I was a lion that was waking back up. And it was after doing a lot of deep work. And that was one of the most pivotal points. Oh my God, thank you for bringing that up. That's a good feeling to come back to.
Yeah, and it's totally fine to have that, happen one, two, three, but sometimes literally somebody will get into doing that super loud lion yawn every 2 minutes for half an hour. And so
Yeah.
that becomes disruptive. And often, more often than not, if a facilitator comes to them and super gently, without getting them into a shame cycle and without getting them into guilt or anything like that, just super gently says like, hey, you're yawning a bit loud. It would be great if you can just internalize that experience. Often people are like, oh, I wasn't aware that I was doing it. And then and it'll stop either immediately or it'll stop after the second time that you bring their attention to it. So there's always this like balance, and it's a fine balance and it's a fine needle to thread between sort of really supporting the individual in going through whatever they're going through and expressing that and showing up in whatever way it needs to, and then taking care of the collective and of the transpersonal experience in the maloka and the ceremony space, and making sure that whatever they're going through doesn't become super disruptive to everybody else. And with the disruption, again, it's a matter of how long it's lasting. Because one
Mm.
of the things that we tell people, because even, if somebody's being loud in the ceremony space and you, in your experience, start projecting onto them that they're ruining your ceremony, and that if only they weren't doing the thing that they're doing, you'd be having an amazing ceremony, that's actually your process. And then you should
I,
look into like, how often do I feel that way in my life? How often do I feel in my life that, oh, if only my mother wasn't doing that thing that she does, or if only my wife or girlfriend weren't doing, or if only my kid wasn't doing, or if only my coworker wasn't doing that thing, everything would be perfect. Ayahuasca is actually trying to teach you that and show you that.
That was my second night of ayahuasca back in 2019, and I wrote about it in my book Soul Life Balance, and it was massive. I mean, this girl was literally calling out like for help, like screaming at the top of her lungs, and you could hear the facilitators tell her like, "We're not going to help you tonight. You got to do the work on your own," And I was starting to get pissed at the facilitators and being like, and telling Mother Aya as well, like, I'm good because I just had my first night, which was everything the night before, and then I was getting mad at the facilitators, I was getting mad at her, and then all this stuff, and it went on, I don't know, it felt like at least a couple of hours. And it got to a point where I started to realize the more I focused on her, and I was on the other side of the room, that she intensified. And then I was starting to gaslight myself about that, be like, no. And it taught me so much. And then ultimately I was able to surrender to it with Rapé. They brought some over to help me. And then that next morning in the sharing circle, she shared before me, and she mentioned how, she felt energetically connected to me all night. And that's when I was like, oh my God, like bringing this full circle with our conversation and not gaslighting myself. My experience with gaslighting myself is usually it comes around again in a way like that, to be like, no, 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 that actually was something you were experiencing. So yeah, it is interesting. Thank you for chatting about this.
Yeah, and also, when you have a really adept practitioner, like the maestros, the maestros that we have, Shipibo maestros, their ability to actually disrupt somebody and disrupt in just without, through an ikaro, through a healing song, through a chant, their ability to disrupt that cycle and to take people into change people's experience and to calm people down is, it's kind of Gandalf stuff. There was once a ceremony that I was in, I was facilitating it, and it was this mom and daughter who were working in the Maloka, this Shipibo mom and daughter. And the daughter was singing to a female guest who was having this really massive release, and she was kind of wailing and sobbing and being super loud. And it was during a song, so nobody, we don't disrupt that, we don't interrupt that, because that, the expert is sitting there in front of her and doing it, and that's what's coming out, and that just is what it is, and we're okay with it. and the mom was diametrically like on the other side of the maloca, how they generally are, because they work, they sing in the circle, and they're generally across from each other in the circle. And the mom was singing to somebody right in front of me. I was sitting on my facilitator mat, and I was sitting kind of in the middle, looking at the mom and not being aware of this woman kind of going off on the other side. And this was going on and on and on and on and on. And suddenly the mom stopped the song that she was singing to the guy that she was singing to, turned around in her spot, and started singing along with her daughter, who was across the room, probably, I don't know, 25 feet away, over my head, across the room to the other person, and singing, kind of weaving in with the daughter's song. And this went on for like 30 seconds, and you could just hear the volume of the guests just go like, doo.
Wow.
And she kept singing to her for another like 2 minutes. And then she stopped singing, turned around, and started singing again to the guy that she was sitting in front of. And the daughter sang to the other female guest for like 2 more minutes, and then moved on to the next person. And that was it for that guest's eruptions that night. So that's, again, with, you know, with an adept, really knowledgeable practitioner, healer, shaman. The Shipibo don't use the term shaman; it's a Siberian term. But you know, for people to understand what we're talking about, that is, you know, the term that generally people refer to in the West. So with a really talented and knowledgeable healer, they can really change those things and help people overcome or transform that situation. And that doesn't mean sweeping it away or putting a veil on it or doing away with it. It means finding the door that's going to help a person break that loop and resolve the friction that they're you know, hitting their head against over and over and over again, and helping them kind of get to the other side of that and make progress on it.
If you're looking for a powerful and transformative experience for your next event, consider bringing in Sam Kabert as a keynote speaker. Sam's message of soul life balance and his expertise in mental health and mindfulness resonate deeply with audiences. He not only inspires with his story, but also offers practical tools like breathwork to help attendees regulate their emotions and reconnect with themselves. You can even have Sam lead a guided breathwork journey, creating a truly unforgettable experience. To learn more or book Sam for your event, check out the link in the show notes to book a call with Sam now.
That's such a good distinction, that we're not just like Band-Aid fixing it and be like, because a lot of times forget about, like, you know, medicine specific, but just like quote unquote doing the work, anyone that's working on themselves. And I think this is something that I know is a trigger point for me. It's like people will say, never entertain a negative feeling or a negative thought. And it's like, no, you got to actually address it and release it. So that's a good point there. I appreciate that. Well, let's switch gears and talk a little bit more about Soltara. Like, how'd you get linked up with Soltara? What's your role there? And for people that aren't familiar with Soltara, if you could just give a little bit of an introduction.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sam. So I drank medicine for the first time in 2004, drank it as often as I could for the next 11 years on Vancouver Island. And then in 2015, I went to Peru for the first time to do a dieta over there, and got super like, oh my God, this is what I want to do. How can I do more of this? How can I do this for like work? And in 2017, I started traveling down, went back to that same center for an extended period, and did kind of a work exchange where I was doing a long-term dieta there and facilitating. Then 2018, I came back there, did a long-term, was there for 6 months, dieting and facilitating and actually general managing this other center. This is not Soltara. This is the center that's near Iquitos in Peru, in the Amazon in Peru. And I did that for a few years, but that center wasn't in a position where it could pay people to do that. So it was a work exchange. So I got, you know, what would have cost me many thousands of dollars worth of medicine work and diets. I got that in exchange for my labor, you know, but at a certain point I was kind of like, okay, this isn't actually like sustainable for me. And so I can't keep like taking 6 months out of my life and out of work and out of earning and going down to Peru, or 4 months going down to Peru doing this work. Because even though it was a work exchange, I'd still spend money and I'd have to, fly and all that other stuff. So in 2022, after the last time that I was there, I kind of felt like, okay, I think I'm done doing this. I need to figure something else out. And I got two kind of job offers at the same time. I'd also just finished doing a few years of working in federal politics in Canada. I was campaign manager for a federal election campaign for 4 times, and then got the MP that I was working for elected, and was his chief of staff for 2 years in the Canadian Parliament. And was kind of done with that, went back to Peru, did 4 months working at the center there, felt like, okay, I can't actually keep doing this for free, as a volunteer. And then I got like two job offers at the same time. One was to come to Soltara because a friend of mine who I'd known for years from BC, from the days that I started doing medicine, he was in the role that I now have. He was one of the retreat directors at Soltara. And so I contacted him saying like, hey, I know that you guys pay facilitators. Do you happen to need somebody? And he's like, yeah, we actually do. And you'd be great for it. So you should come on down. And at the same time, I got a really interesting job offer to be like a communications consultant for this like really huge like 3-year project with coastal Indigenous First Nations in Canada around like marine protected areas and all this kind of stuff. I was like, whoa, these were two like diametrically opposed, but both like massive opportunities and kind of like dream jobs in their own ways. And I really sat with it, and I decided like, no, I want to actually see, can I dedicate myself like full time to medicine work, to helping people transform their lives, transform their consciousness, and get on a better path on also just physical health, because I have stuff to say about that in my path. And so I went to Soltara, started working there as a facilitator. Really quickly was told that they might want me to step into the management of the medicine side of things. And a few months later was asked to step into the management side of things. My friend who hired me decided to step away and do an independent thing. And so I took over for him. And then recently my counterpart, because there was always two retreat directors and we'd swap out each other every 3 months, something like that. And recently my colleague who I was swapping out with, she decided to move on to other things. And there was a decision made not to replace her. So now I am the retreat director at Soltara, and when I'm not there, I remote manage, but I'm there more than I used to be. So that's the path, the long-winded path from 2004 to here.
Yeah. So would you say like half your time is in Canada and half out there in Costa Rica, or?
So now it's moving more towards 2/3 of the time in Costa Rica. It might even go as high as 70% of the time in Costa Rica, and 30% of the time not in Costa Rica, which is part Canada. But also, I want to still go diet in Peru. So there's going to be times that it's going to be in Peru. I go visit my family on the other side of the world. So sometime there, and maybe sometime traveling, but also my partner and I are exploring the idea of actually relocating to Costa Rica full time. So it might just become that I live in Costa Rica full time. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I put in more information than the listeners know, but to coordinate this, I have like a Calendly link and ask for an address so I can send a copy of my book. And I saw Canada in there, and I was like, oh, I expected to see Costa Rica. I didn't expect to see Canada, so I'm surprised by that. But that's really cool. Could you tell us a little bit more about Soltara and are there now 3 locations, or is it 2?
So there's one location that's fully owned and operated by Soltara, and that's the original Soltara location. That's at Playa Blanca in the tip of the Nicoya Peninsula. And so Soltara is the child of 2 co-founders, Daniel Cleland and Melissa Stengel. who met each other in Peru in a previous project that Daniel was involved in Peru that also had to do with Soltara and ecotourism. Sorry, not with ayahuasca and ecotourism in Peru. And then Dan recognized kind of an opportunity to open a center in Costa Rica, where you can do medicine above board, legally, or it's decriminalized. You can do officially. You can officially have a medicine center, and and to do it in a way that makes it like very accessible for people who are not going to go do it in the jungle hut in Peru with rats and all kinds of stuff like that, which sometimes happens over there. And so he had this vision and brought Melissa on board to realize the vision. And so Playa Blanca is the original Soltara, and that is a place where you still get the traditional, very kind of like puro shipibo, like pure shipibo ceremonies in the Maloca, which is the ceremony space. But outside of the Maloca, you're getting a pretty comfortable kind of 5-star resort vibe. So, like air-conditioned rooms, hot water, really nicely appointed rooms, nice furniture, king size or queen size beds with high cotton thread count sheets and really nice plush towels and amazing food and amazing views from every balcony and a pool and access to the beach and just like, super high-end guest services. So that's Playa Blanca. And then over the years, Soltara has had satellite locations where, because there was demand, and there was also a desire on Soltara's part to offer people options, return guests if they want to experience ayahuasca in a different locale with a little bit of different vibes. So there's been a few different locations over the years, 2 locations in Peru and a couple locations in Costa Rica, where these locations are not owned and operated by Soltara. They're locations that are owned by somebody else, and Soltara leases them and then runs our program with our facilitation staff, with our maestros, healers there. So right now we have one satellite location. It is also in Costa Rica. It's close to Montezuma. It's like an hour and a half away from Playa Blanca on the Nicoya Peninsula. And that place is a lot more jungly. It's not on a beach. It's not on an ocean beach, but it is between 2 rivers. So there's like waterfalls and beautiful dipping places. The canopy there is really thick. It's very, very jungly. Whereas like Soltara, Playa Blanca, it still is technically in the Costa Rican jungle, but because of sort of, it's manicured landscaping and it's more like open and resorty, so it doesn't feel as jungly when you're walking around. But in our secondary location, it's, the paths between places, they're kind of like single wide walking paths where you're walking between, big trees and ferns. And it's also, the secondary location is off grid. So it's solar panels and batteries. There's no cell reception there. We have internet there, but it's not, and you can still make calls and stuff like that, but it's not like the super high speed internet that we're used to. And it's super quiet over there. Like at Playa Blanca, we're still like, we're close to a couple of local villages. So you do sometimes hear, like music from the beach, or you sometimes hear, like somebody revving a motorcycle or stuff like that down in the village. It's not very disruptive, but you're still kind of hearing that, and you're still very connected to, you can be connected to the outside world through high-speed internet. We do recommend people do a digital detox and turn in their phones for the retreat, and some people do. But at our secondary location, you're a lot more removed from any of the sounds and feelings and the instant data and connectivity that you get. So both locations are amazing in their own way and different in what they offer, although it's still the same facilitation, the same maestros, the same medicine, and the same level of service.
Amazing. Yeah, I haven't had the chance to dance with Soltara yet. I love Costa Rica. I've been wanting to go Soltara, and when the time comes, I know I'll be there. So I'm looking forward to that. And for anyone that wants more information, you can go to soltara.co. Actually, soltara.co, excuse me. It's SOLTARA.co, and that's in the show notes as well. Yeah, this has been really awesome, Elan. Thank you for sharing your journey. Thank you for talking with us about ayahuasca, Soltara. What do you think? Anyone anyone that's curious, or maybe no. Let me see. This is a better question here. Integration. If you could say one thing about integration, whether it's ayahuasca or any other plant medicine, for someone that just maybe struggling, or just what integration looks like to you, and kind of your best tips for people out there.
Yeah, so thanks for that question. If I may, I want to, because it feels like we're getting maybe close to wrapping, I want to take one step back before that, because I want to say another thing about like why it might be a good reason to challenge yourself in going for plant medicine. And it doesn't, it doesn't have to be Soltara, and it doesn't have to be ayahuasca. There's other ways to do it and other venues. But I think that, we exist in a culture where we're really enabled in never experiencing discomfort. So we're really enabled in running away from discomfort. We have a pill for every ill, and there's a million ways to distract ourselves, and a million ways, addictions and food and booze and drugs and watching all of Netflix and social media and a whole, host of what, and, anti-anxiety medication, antidepressant medication, all these different things. And and this is stuff I didn't come up with this stuff. This is stuff that I heard other people, smarter people than me say. But if you look at like indigenous cultures, every indigenous culture that you'll ever come across has always had, um, as a common denominator, they've had these rites of passage, that the common denominator for them was that the initiate signs up for discomfort. The initiate signs up for something knowing that they're about to bump up against their edges, that they're going to be uncomfortable, maybe even in danger. And so if you think like ayahuasca ceremony, peyote ceremony, Sundance, Vision Quest, first sweat lodge, first hunting party, first raiding party, whatever it is, bungee jumping in the Pacific Islands where they did that, they all have in common that people were signing up for discomfort. And those traditions produced resilient people and resilient cultures. The fact that most of them lost, or all of them lost out to Western expansionism, wasn't because the Westerners were more resilient. It was because the Westerners, our ancestors, had a technological advantage that couldn't be overcome by the indigenous cultures. But our aversion from discomfort and this enabling to avoid discomfort makes for non-resilient people and non-resilient cultures. And that lack of resiliency makes us much more like fall prey to manipulations, to marketing, to gurus, to charlatans, to cynical politicians who sell us nightmares and tell us that they're the only ones who can protect us from those nightmares. And so I think that like when we answer the call to ayahuasca, in my experience, what I've come to, and again, this is a synthesis of things that I heard from other people, is that I think that we're answering some ancient, like even like deep subconscious thing that is yearning for that feeling of indigeneity, for that feeling of belonging, for that feeling of belonging to nature, for that feeling of belonging to a grander tapestry than what this culture or what our minds and what media is presenting us as. The only time that media tells us to feel uncomfortable is when they're telling us you should feel uncomfortable, but if you buy this phone, then you'll feel comfortable for 5 minutes until we'll tell you that you're uncomfortable again, and then you need to buy these sunglasses or this car or stuff like that. So I think that like ayahuasca is medicine, plant medicine work is uncomfortable. Discomfort is a feature, not a bug in plant medicine work. And if you're feeling uncomfortable, you're doing it right. Because a lot of times people come and in the first ceremony or whatever, they're like, whoa, that was so uncomfortable. I think this isn't for me. It's like, no, it's meant to be uncomfortable. And so I think that now tying it to the integration and to what you said, with integration, the first and most fundamental aspect of integration is patience and compassion. You have to have patience with yourself. You have to have compassion with yourself. You are going to fall, like, because you go into plant medicine work, you have these realizations while you're in the medicine of ways that you've been showing up in the world that you don't want to show up in. It might be the first time that you see your responsibility for some of your own suffering. It might be the first time that you see your responsibility in suffering that you're causing other people. Sometimes for me, the first time that I experienced some of those things was involved with shame and guilt and feelings that, like, whoa, I'm irredeemable. I'm a terrible person. And okay, I'm going to change. I'm committed that I'm going to change. There's no way I'm not going to do this again. And then I go out into regular, what I call consensus reality, because people often say, oh, but what's going to happen when I go out to the real world? And I'm like, that's not the real world, actually. That's consensus reality. That's not, that world is full of illusion and full of delusion.
Well said.
But when we go into that consensus reality, and then we bump up against that moment of discomfort, and I reacted exactly in the way that I swore in the ceremony that I would never react again. And then I can step away, and the next day I realize that I did that, and I can feel, oh my God, I'm irredeemable. I said that I wouldn't do that again, and here I was, the first time it came up, I did it again. But then after a while, I suddenly realized, like, whoa, this is actually the first time outside of a ceremony that I recognize that. And so even though I acted yesterday in a way that I don't want to act anymore, and in a way that I feel is out of integrity and is a bad choice, and I cause myself or somebody else pain, me recognizing this right now is a mini triumph. So let's see if next time I can recognize it sooner, or I can recognize it before I do it. And sometimes the arc between, for the first time in ceremony, recognizing my responsibility in my suffering and in the pain that I cause myself and other people, to the point where I stop that behavior, that arc could be a year long, but of shortening the time span that it takes for when I realize that, oh, I just behaved in a way that I don't want to behave in anymore. And to the point where pretty soon it gets to a point where, let's say this is some pattern that I have with my mom, where she says something and that something triggers me, and then I react in an impatient way, and then she gets hurt and she says stuff, and we both walk away feeling they always do that. She always does that. He always does that. Which to me, I always say, like, if you're saying after an interaction, they always do that, what that means is that you walked into that interaction with a bullseye that you painted on your chest and said, hit me right here. So that's kind of like my responsibility there. And so eventually I got to a point where I did that, and I picked up the phone and said to my mom, hey mom, that conversation that we just had, I showed up in a way that I don't want to show up in anymore. So I'm sorry that I did that. I'm not saying that it's all on me. You have a responsibility too, but I'm saying that I'm going to try to change this. And then eventually getting to a point where mid-sentence I say, hey mom, what we're just doing, can we rewind 5 minutes? Because I don't want to do this anymore. We've been doing this for 20 years. I don't want to engage this way anymore. And then eventually getting to a point where I'm not there in all my things, but I'm there in a lot of things with my mom, who's an amazing woman, and I love her, where she'll do something and I'll laugh and I'll say, mom, in the past, what you just said would have caused me to my mind to explode. And we would have gone into that cycle of crap, and we both would have walked away hurt and upset and feeling victimized and self-righteous. And now it's kind of funny to me what you just said, and it's not a trigger anymore for me. But that could take a year from the moment of realizing it in ceremony to the moment where I'm actually not doing it anymore. So integration to me is all about patience. It's all about compassion. It's all about forgiveness. It's all about understanding that falling isn't failing. In medicine work, we fall, and not only medicine work, any self-development, any path of trying to become better people and of changing our behavioral patterns, we fall and we get up, and we fall and we get up, and we fall and we get up, and falling isn't failing. As long as we get up, our success is assured. And this isn't about enlightenment. I don't know anybody who's enlightened. I don't know
Yeah, I
anybody who
couldn't agree
knows
more.
anybody who's enlightened. I don't know anybody who knows anybody who knows anybody who's enlightened. So that's not what it's about.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with all of that, and especially the point about enlightenment as well. Yeah, our seemingly setbacks are really setups, and just anchoring that in, I find to be so important. Ilan, this has been absolutely incredible. We'll have to do this again. We could have a whole nother episode just on the last 10 minutes of what we spoke on. So thank you so much for being here. Is there any way that the listeners could get in touch with you directly if they would like to?
Absolutely. First of all, for you, Sam, if and when you feel that you want to come to Soltara, definitely hit me up, and we'll see what we can do to make it easier for you. And for the listeners, I am on Soltara's integration platform, which is called Nectara. And if you feel that you wanna, I am also on Instagram. I don't post very often because I'm kind of trying to moderate my. I haven't posted actually in a very long time there, because every time I'm going to post something, I really ask myself, like, why am I posting? What am I doing here? Is this really, like, does this make sense to me? And so often I just end up saying, like, no, it doesn't, and I just delete it, and that's what's been happening for over a year now. But I am out there. Ilan Goldenblatt is my handle on Instagram. It is a private account, but if you hit me up, I'll okay you and follow you back. And so yeah, that's where I don't like giving out my email and stuff like that, because honestly I hate email and I'm drowning in emails. So but certainly through Instagram or through Soltara's integration platform, Nectara. And that's the other thing about integration, is that Soltara puts a lot of resources into that. So if you do happen to come to Soltara, we support you after you leave our front gate.
Yeah, that's so important. I've heard that from friends, because I know a lot of people have gone to Soltara. So all of those links will be in the show notes. You guys can just go in the show notes and find those. Ilan, thank you so much for making the time. I appreciate how you're showing up in showing up in the world, brother. There we go.
Thank you so much, Brother Sam. It's been excellent, really joyful to connect with you. Thanks for asking good questions, and thanks for putting in your work and your heart into this world. It's so important that we put our shoulders together, and we can't do it alone.
100%. That's it. Thank you so much for listening to the very end. I hope you dug this podcast just as much as I enjoyed it. If you got anything at all, please, if you could just do me a favor and leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to this podcast, it helps the show grow. So thank you for considering to leave a review. If you want to go deeper with Soltara or Ilan, you can find the links to connect with them in the show notes. And if you want to work with me, the best way to work with me, the easiest way to work with me is the free way, and that's by joining the Breath Club. The link to the Breath Club is in the show notes. And also know that I'm available for one-on-one support, that is coaching and guidance, as well as keynotes and breathwork journeys for conferences and events. Thank you so much, and I will see you on the next episode of The Soul Seek.